Most men think asking the right questions means having a good conversation. But here's what nobody tells you: the questions that build real intimacy have nothing to do with getting answers. They're about creating a specific emotional state where a woman feels safe enough to let you in. And most men never learn this because they're too busy trying to impress instead of trying to connect. There's a small group of men who understand something the rest don't. They know that intimacy isn't built through logic or clever conversation. It's built through emotional resonance. And the questions they ask create that resonance without triggering her defenses, without making her feel exposed, and without the risk of rejection that comes from being too direct too soon. Today, I'm going to show you exactly how they do it. What you're about to learn isn't dating advice, it's psychology. Specifically, how emotional safety, vulnerability loops, and identity based questioning create the conditions for intimacy to develop naturally. This isn't about manipulation. It's about understanding what's happening beneath the surface when two people connect on a level that feels rare and magnetic. By the end of this video, you'll understand three psychological triggers that turn ordinary questions into intimacy builders. And you'll see why the third one is the difference between men who get friend zoned and men who become unforgettable. But first, we need to talk about why most questions fail. Here's what happens when most men try to connect with a woman. They ask surface questions. What do you do? Where are you from? What are your hobbies? And they think they're building connection because they're showing interest. But here's the problem: those questions don't create emotional intimacy, they create interviews. And interviews feel safe for you, but boring for her because nothing in those questions makes her feel seen. Nothing makes her reveal something real. And without revelation, there's no vulnerability. Without vulnerability, there is no intimacy. You think you're playing it safe by keeping things light, but what you're actually doing is staying in the zone where every other guy operates, the zone of politeness and surface level rapport. And in that zone, you're forgettable. Now, some men go the opposite direction. They try to get deep too fast. They ask heavy questions about her past, her fears, her insecurities, and they think they're creating intimacy because they're going below the surface. But what they're actually doing is making her feel exposed without earning the right. And that doesn't create connection. It creates discomfort, which she registers as rejection risk. So she pulls back. The irony is this: the men who try too hard to create intimacy kill it. And the men who play it too safe never get there at all. So what's the solution? You ask questions that don't feel like questions. You create emotional experiences that she wants to stay in. And you do it in a way that makes her feel understood, not interrogated. Let me show you how. The first psychological trigger is something I call the identity reflection principle. And it works because of one simple truth: people don't fall for who you are, they fall for who they become when they're around you. Here's what that means. When you ask a woman a question, you're not just gathering information, you're showing her which version of herself you're interested in. And the version you reflect back to her determines how she feels in your presence. Most men reflect the surface version. They ask about her job, her schedule, her weekend plans, and she gives surface answers because that's the version of herself she's used to showing strangers. It's the social mask, the persona, and it's boring to her because she lives there every day. But when you ask questions that reflect her internal world, her values, her way of seeing things, something shifts. She starts to feel like you're seeing a version of her that most people miss. And that version feels more alive, more interesting, more her. So instead of asking, "What do you do for work?" you might ask, "What's something you're working on right now that actually excites you?" Notice the difference. The first question is about what she does. The second is about what she cares about. And when you ask about what she cares about, you're not just learning about her, you're inviting her to show you who she is beneath the routine. Or instead of asking, "Where did you grow up?" you ask, "What's a place that shaped how you see the world?" Again, the shift is subtle, but the emotional impact is profound because now she's not reciting facts, she's revealing meaning. This is the identity reflection principle in action. You're not asking her to perform, you're asking her to share the parts of herself that feel significant. And when she does, she associates you with the feeling of being truly seen. That's not attraction yet, but it's the foundation because intimacy begins when someone feels like you understand them in a way others don't. The second trigger is what I call the vulnerability loop. And this is where most men get it wrong because they don't understand how vulnerability actually works between two people. Here's the common mistake: men think that if they ask a woman to be vulnerable, she'll open up and intimacy will happen. So they ask probing questions. They dig. They try to get her to share something personal, and they think they're building connection. But here's what actually happens: when you ask someone to be vulnerable without being vulnerable yourself first, you create an imbalance. She feels exposed. You feel safe. You feel an imbalance doesn't create intimacy, it creates distance. Real vulnerability works as a loop. You share something, she shares something, you go a little deeper, she goes a little deeper. And the rhythm of that exchange creates emotional safety because neither person is out there alone. So the questions that build intimacy aren't just about getting her to open up, they're about creating the conditions where opening up feels natural. And the way you do that is by going first. Not with some rehearsed story, not with trauma dumping or oversharing, but with small, honest reflections that show you're human, that you think about things, that you're willing to be real. So instead of asking, "What's your biggest fear?" which feels invasive and one sided, you might say something like, "I was thinking the other day about how we all have these versions of success we're told to chase, but most of them don't actually mean anything when you really think about it. Do you ever feel that way?" Notice what just happened. You didn't ask her to expose herself. You shared the thought and then you invited her to respond. That's the loop. You went first and now she can choose to meet you there or not. But either way, she doesn't feel pressured. She feels safe. And here's the key: when you share something real, even if it's small, she starts to trust that you're not just collecting information, you're connecting. And connection requires both people to show up. This is why the vulnerability loop is so powerful. It doesn't force intimacy, it creates the space for it to happen naturally. And the questions that create that space don't sound like questions at all. They sound like moments of shared reflection. Now, the third trigger, and this is the one that separates everything. This is what creates the kind of intimacy that lingers, the kind that makes her think about you when you're not there. I call it the future self. Invitation. Here's how it works: most conversations live in the past or the present. What you've done, what you're doing, where you've been, what you like. And those conversations can be pleasant, but they don't create forward momentum. They don't make her imagine a future where you're part of her story. The future self invitation does. It's a question or statement that invites her to articulate who she's becoming. Not who she is, not who she was, but who she wants to be. And when you invite someone to talk about their future self, you're doing something psychologically powerful. You're connecting with the version of her that doesn't exist yet, the version she's trying to create. And here's why that matters. When a woman shares her aspirations, her vision, her evolving identity with you, she starts to associate you with that vision. You become part of the story she's telling herself about who she's becoming. And that's intimate because most people never ask about that. They ask about where she went to school, what she does on weekends, what her favorite food is, but you're asking about the future. And the future is where desire lives. So instead of asking, "What are you passionate about?" which is generic and overused, you might ask, "What's something you're becoming more sure about as you get older?" Or if you could design the next year of your life without worrying about what's practical, what would you actually want to focus on? These questions do something different. They don't ask her to describe herself, they ask her to envision herself. And envisioning is an emotional act. It requires her to access her desires, her values, her sense of direction. And when she does that with you, you're no longer just someone she's talking to. You're someone she's sharing her inner world with. This is the difference between rapport and intimacy. Rapport is pleasant. Intimacy is magnetic. And the future self invitation creates magnetism because it shows her that you're interested in who she's becoming, not just who she's been. Here's the deeper layer. When you ask questions about her future self, you're also subtly communicating something about yourself. You're showing that you think about growth, that you value evolution, that you're not stuck, and that's attractive. Not because you're trying to impress her, but because you're operating from a place of emotional depth that most men don't access. So, how do you actually use this in real life? Let's bring it together. You're talking to a woman, Maybe it's a first conversation. Maybe it's someone you've known for a while but never connected with deeply. And you want to move beyond surface level without forcing it. You start with the identity reflection principle. You ask questions that invite her to share what matters to her, not just what she does. What's something you've been thinking about lately that you don't usually talk about? Simple, open, non threatening, but it signals that you're interested in her thoughts, not her resume. Then you bring in the vulnerability loop. You don't just ask, you share. I've been realizing how much I value time alone. Like, I used to think that was something I needed to fix about myself, but now I see it as how I recharge. Do you have something like that? Something you need that doesn't really make sense to other people. Notice how that works. You went first. You were honest. You made it safe for her to be honest back. And now the conversation has depth. Then, when the moment feels right, you introduce the future self invitation. Where do you see yourself growing in the next few years? Not career stuff necessarily, just like as a person. Or what's something you want to get better at? Not because you have to, but because it feels important to who you're becoming. These aren't pickup lines, they're not tactics. They're invitations into a different kind of conversation. And the women who respond to them are the ones who value emotional depth, which means you're not just building intimacy, you're filtering for the kind of connection that actually matters. If you want to go deeper into this, I've put together a free guide that breaks down the psychology of emotional connection and gives you a framework for creating intimacy without games or pressure. It's called The Grounded Man's Guide to Emotional Presence. You can grab it in the description below. It's designed to help you show up with more confidence and clarity in your interactions, not from a place of need, but from a place of groundedness. Here's what I want you to remember. Intimacy isn't something you force, it's something you create space for. And the questions that create that space aren't about getting information, they're about creating emotional resonance. When you understand the identity reflection principle, the vulnerability loop, and the future self invitation, you're not just asking better questions, you're changing the entire dynamic of how you connect with people. You're moving from transaction to transformation. And that's what women feel and remember. This isn't about being perfect, it's about being present. It's about showing up with curiosity and emotional honesty. And when you do that, intimacy stops being a risk. It becomes a natural outcome. If this resonated with you, subscribe, drop a comment, and let me know which trigger made the most sense. And take a moment to think about how you've been showing up in your conversations, because the shift you're looking for doesn't start with her, it starts with you.